In the mountains of North Carolina stands a house that should never have existed. 250 rooms, built by George Vanderbilt, adjusted for today. It cost more than $200 million. Money made by the most powerful empire in 19th century America. The Vanderbilt Railroad Empire once controlled how people moved, worked, and lived, and Biltmore was its ultimate symbol. But when the empire collapsed, the money didn't vanish. It changed form. The billionaires stopped building palaces and learned how to hide power instead. But I am not in North Carolina. I am standing on a street corner in Dearborn, Michigan, where the ghost of a different kind of empire lingers in the humid morning air. I reach out and press my palm against the rough, crimson surface of a house on Norwood Street. This isn't just masonry. It is a fossilized ambition. To the visitors gathered around me, I am just a man in a lanyard with a deep knowledge of the Ford Homes Historic District. To me, this is personal. Every time I touch these red bricks, I am touching the biography of my grandfather, James, and the thousands like him who traded their autonomy for a slice of the American dream, manufactured by the man who redefined the world. If Biltmore was the loud, screaming roar of Gilded Age excess, this neighborhood was the silent, calculated hum of the machine that followed. The Vanderbilts built palaces to show you where they were. Henry Ford built these streets to show you where you belonged. He realized what the old railroad barons did not. You do not need a golden throne to rule an empire. You just need to control the kitchen, the bedroom, and the soul of the man who works your assembly line. My grandfather lived in this exact model. House number 405. He arrived here in the early 1920s, a child of immigrants with nothing but a strong back and a fear of poverty. When he first held the key to a Ford-built home, he thought he had conquered the world. He had indoor plumbing. He had a gas stove. He had a yard for my father to play in. The hum of a distant engine fills the silence. That engine is the Rouge plant, just minutes away. In my grandfather's time, that roar never stopped. It was the heartbeat of the city, but the key came with a shadow. This neighborhood was a social experiment, a laboratory for human engineering. Henry Ford did not just want to build cars, he wanted to build a model man. He hated the chaos of the city, the drinking, the gambling, the messy, unpredictable nature of immigrant life. So, he built this, a world of 90-degree angles, a world where every front porch looked the same. Because in Ford's mind, a standardized life was an efficient life. I lead the group down the sidewalk, our footsteps echoing in a rhythmic cadence. Living here in 1924 was not like living in a town. It was like living inside a corporate brochure. The Vanderbilts used their hundreds of millions to build a castle that stood apart from the world. Ford used his billions to weave himself into the world. He understood that the ultimate power is not a gate that keeps people out. It is a door that lets you in to watch them. My grandfather spent 31 years in the roar of the Rouge. He was a master of the furnace. He knew the temper of steel better than the temper of his own children. He gave the best years of his life to the Ford Motor Company, and in return, the company gave him a neat brick box. But as I stand here today, I realize that the box had invisible bars. We think of the Gilded Age as a time of massive, visible monuments like Biltmore. But the real shift happened here. The billionaires realized that palaces are targets. They realized that if you want an empire that lasts, you do not build it out of marble and gold leaf. You build it out of red brick and social contracts. You make it look like a gift. You make it look like home. I take a deep breath, the scent of cut grass and old exhaust hitting me. I see my grandfather standing on one of these porches, his back straight, his eyes scanning the street for the company inspector's car. He was proud of this house. He loved this house. That is the most haunting part of the story. How an empire can make you love the very things it uses to keep you in line. The air feels heavy with the weight of 5,000 identical windows watching us. Every brick was laid with the intention of creating a predictable human being. In the Vanderbilt era, power was about being seen from miles away. In the Ford era, power became the air you breathed and the floor you scrubbed. My grandfather probably felt the same texture of this brick when he came home from a 10-hour shift. his lungs filled with soot and his mind filled with the company's rules. He did not see a cage. He saw a miracle of modern engineering. He saw progress. But I see the fine print in the contract. I see the price of the $5 day, paid in the currency of privacy and personal eccentricity. The sun reflects off the glass, identical in every frame down the block. This is where the modern world was born, not in the boardrooms of New York, but in the standardized kitchens of Dearborn. This is where the empire learned that the most effective way to manage a workforce was to manage their lives after the whistle blew. The fluorescent lights in the archive basement hum with a sterile, predatory persistence. This graveyard of metal shelves holds manila folders, dissected lives of men believing they were simply earning a living. The screech of a drawer echoes like a sharp cry. Folder number 7422. James's name sits in the upper corner. He is no longer my grandfather. He is a data point. A photograph falls from the file. James, 1926, staring into the camera with a forced, rigid smile, a man proving his happiness to a corporate lens. Behind the photo, the ink of the Ford sociological department is sharp and unforgiving. This is no personnel file. It is an autopsy of private existence. Subject visited at 7 o'clock in the evening. The report begins. The investigator stands on the porch, clipboard in hand, a silhouette of corporate authority. Kitchen inspected. Surfaces found to be adequate in cleanliness. No evidence of fermented spirits detected in the pantry. The subject's wife appears to manage the household budget with appropriate frugality. Appropriate frugality. The Ford Motor Company claims the rights to a family shopping list. The cleanliness of a stove determines the value of a man's labor at the furnace. The intrusion deepens on the next page. The investigator questions the neighbors. They seek knowledge of taverns. They check the polish on my father's school shoes. Observation. Subject failed to attend the Methodist service on the morning of November 14th. The report notes in cold block letters. Inquiry revealed he was resting due to exhaustion from the double shift. Warning issued. Spiritual neglect leads to industrial inefficiency. The air in this basement is thin. 100,000 scrutinized men breathe what little oxygen remains. This is the dark alchemy of the $5 day. Henry Ford, the world's philanthropist, is here a voyeur. He does not pay for skills with a wrench. He purchases the right to dictate morality. He buys the interior of a mind. The folder is a ledger of debt, not financial, but a debt of character. Every dollar earned is conditional. One unwashed dish, one bottle of beer under the floorboards, one Sunday spent sleeping instead of praying, and the house on Norwood Street vanishes. The security of a childhood is a mirage, sustained only by a perfect performance of middle-class virtue. A slip of paper is tucked into the back, a handwritten note from the investigator to his supervisor. The subject's wife expresses a desire to paint the front door a shade of blue. Permission denied. Uniformity must be maintained to ensure community cohesion. A blue door, a tiny spark of individuality in a sea of red brick denied by a man in a suit miles away. Anger is a roar matching the furnaces of the Rouge. They turn a sanctuary into a corporate asset. They turn the intimate act of raising a child into a metric for assembly line productivity. The weight of the folder is heavy, heavier than paper. It represents the theft of privacy. The Vanderbilt mansions are monuments to greed, but those railroad barons never pretended to be a father. They never demanded to see a pantry before letting a man work. Ford's empire is a velvet-lined trap. He provides the stove, the sink, and the roof, then uses those comforts as leverage to ensure an original thought never occurs. 31 years of work documented like a laboratory experiment. Rows of identical gray boxes stretch into the darkness. Thousands of folders, thousands of Jameses. Every kitchen scrubbed for an inspector. Every life lived in fear of a failed morality report. The railroad barons controlled the land, but Ford discovered a more profitable territory. The quiet hours between the shifts. The silence of the room is gone, replaced by phantom voices asking about church attendance and beer. The exit is ahead, footsteps loud on the concrete floor. The basement remains, but the blue door stays in the mind. The empire tried to standardize a man, to make him as interchangeable as a Model T fender. They failed. They have the paperwork, but they never truly had the man. The ink on the page is a centripetal force, pulling the most intimate details of a home into the cold center of a factory ledger. My grandmother's choice of soap, my grandfather's fatigue, the very air in their living room, all categorized, filed, and owned. This is the ultimate empire, not one that spans continents with steel rails, but one that spans the distance from the front door to the dinner table. The report ends with a final, chilling summary. Subject is a reliable machine. Continued monitoring recommended to ensure no drift into non-standard behavior. Reliability. Machines do not paint doors blue. Machines do not sleep in on Sundays. Machines do not have a private life. They are property. And in 1926, in the shadow of the Rouge, my family was property. The basement door shuts behind me. The hum of the archive fades, but the feeling of being watched lingers. The red brick houses of Dearborn wait in the sun. 5,000 identical boxes holding 5,000 stories that the sociological department tried to rewrite. The folders are closed, but the history is still breathing. The stone walls of Fair Lane rise from the banks of the Rouge River like a fortress of limestone and iron. 56 rooms of calculated isolation. This is not a house of hospitality. It is the central command of an empire of order. To the tourists, it is an architectural marvel of the prairie style, blending seamlessly into the Michigan woods. To me, it is the domestic version of the assembly line, a place where even the river is forced to work. The private powerhouse stands separate from the main residence, its turbines humming with a low, mechanical growl. Henry Ford did not trust the outside world. He did not trust the municipal grid. He demanded a world that depended on nothing but his own vision. Electricity flows from the river into the house, powering a laboratory of human behavior. Ford's experiment did not end at the factory gates. It lived in his hallways, his kitchens, and his guest rooms. Hidden staircases and service passages thread through the interior like a second, secret nervous system. These are the arteries of invisibility. The servants, the cooks, the maids, the chauffeurs are the phantoms of the empire. They move through the walls, appearing only when a bell rings on the service board and vanishing the moment the task is complete. Their presence must never disrupt the illusion of a perfect, self-sustaining world. Their exhaustion is a silent tax paid to maintain the shine of the mahogany floors. The Great Hall is a vacuum of control. In this room, Ford hosted the most powerful men in the world, not as guests, but as subjects. The menu is a dictated regimen: whole grains, soybeans, vegetables grown on the estate, no alcohol, no tobacco, no deviation. Ford viewed food as fuel and the human body as an engine to be optimized. To sit at his table was to submit to his dietary theories, to have your very digestion scrutinized by the man who revolutionized the vate. Every hour is accounted for. Guests find themselves subjected to Ford's theories on sleep, lighting, and movement. Relaxation at Fair Lane is never aimless. It is a productive exercise. Walks through the thousands of acres of gardens are inspections of botanical trut, tuta, order. Conversations are calibrated to reinforce convictions already held. The mansion is a giant theater of predictability where no one, not even the master, feels truly free to be spontaneous. I stand in the service corridor, the air cooler here, away from the grand fireplaces. My grandfather, James, never stood in this hallway, but his life was governed by the same clock that ticked against these stone walls. He was 1,000 yards away at the Rouge plant, but he was inside this house in spirit. The same mind that designed the invisible servant passages designed the standardized houses on Norwood Street. The goal was identical: a world without friction, a world where human messiness is engineered out of existence. The bellboard in the kitchen is a map of expectation. Each number corresponds to a room, a need, a command. Response time is measured in seconds. Delays are documented. Repeated failures lead to dismissal. The household staff exists in a state of constant, quiet tension, their livelihoods tied to the whim of a man who hates unpredictability. A servant who pleases Ford one month might find themselves on the street the next for a minor infraction of the routine. The silence of Fair Lane is not the silence of peace. It is the silence of suppression. The river is diverted through the turbines to create light, and the people are diverted through the rules to create order. This estate is a laboratory for the belief that one man's vision should govern how everyone else lives. It is the ultimate expression of self-sufficiency. A man who built his own world because he could not control the one outside his gates. The basement holds the machinery that keeps the dream alive. Massive boilers, electrical panels, intricate heating systems. Ford spent hours here, testing materials, tweaking configurations, treating his home like a prototype. He wanted to solve the problem of living. He wanted to standardize the domestic experience until it was as reliable as a piton piston. I look out the window toward the river. The water flows over the dam, white and relentless. It is the only thing at Fair Lane that does not follow a manual. Everything else, the servants behind the walls, the guests at the table, the workers in the distant plant, is part of a grand, invisible architecture of control. The mansion is a monument to the disappearance of the individual. The tour group moves toward the library, their voices hushed as if they are in a cathedral. They see the craftsmanship. They see the rare woods. They do not see the bellboard. They do not see the hidden doors. They do not see the price of the invisibility. My grandfather was a Pete Tong in the factory, and the people in this house were Pete Tongs in the home. Different rooms, same engine. The empire did not just build a house. It built a cage of stone and expectations. And as the sun sets behind the powerhouse, the shadows of the limestone walls grow long, reaching across the grass toward the town, toward the factory, toward every life that was pulled into the orbit of Fair Lane. The shoreline of Lake Street Clare is a jagged edge of cold blue water and limestone. And there, rising like a haunting echo of a Cotswold village, stands Gaukler Point. This is the home of Edsel Ford and his wife, Eleanor. To the casual observer, it is a masterpiece of architectural grace, a sanctuary of hand-cut stone and leaded glass windows that seem to have grown out of the Michigan soil over centuries rather than years. But to me, standing on the manicured terrace, this house represents a different kind of tragedy. If Fair Lane was a fortress of industrial willpower, Gaukler Point was a gilded cage designed for a man who possessed a fortune but lacked a voice. Edsel Ford lived his entire life navigating a brutal contradiction. He was the heir to the greatest industrial throne on earth, yet he worked under the thumb of a father who viewed his son's refined tastes with a mixture of suspicion and open contempt. Henry Ford wanted a successor made of iron and grease. He got a man who loved the delicate strokes of a paintbrush and the avant-garde curves of European design. Gaukler Point was Edsel's quiet rebellion. Here, there are no exposed steel beams or assembly line logic. Instead, the architect Albert Kahn, the same man who designed the brutalist expanse of the Rouge plant, was commissioned to create a dream of antiquity. No piston rhythms here, only the soft sound of waves hitting the seawall. Inside the Great Hall, the air is thick with the scent of old wood and the weight of unsaid words. Eleanor Ford filled these rooms with art that would have made Henry's blood boil. On the walls hang works by Paul Cézanne and Henri Matisse. In the dining room, the massive fresco by Diego Rivera serves as a constant reminder of the world outside the gates. Rivera's art celebrates the worker, the sweat, and the grit of the factory, yet it hangs in a room where the finest crystal clinks over hushed conversations. This is the paradox of Gaukler Point. The beauty within these walls was purchased by the very machinery that was slowly crushing Edsel's spirit. Edsel was a prisoner of the empire's success. Every beautiful object, every rare book in the library, every acre of the Jens Jensen-designed gardens was subsidized by the relentless, soul-grinding efficiency of the Rouge. Edsel wanted to modernize the company, to give the cars style and grace, to treat the workers with a dignity that went beyond a morality check. But every time he reached for the wheel, his father's hand was there to jerk it back. Henry undermined Edsel's appointments, overruled his designs, and planted spies in his executive offices. Gaukler Point was the only place where Edsel could breathe. Yet even here, the shadow of the father reached across the lawn. I look at the portrait of Edsel Ford in the gallery. His eyes are deep pools of exhaustion. By the mid-1930s, his stomach was a knot of ulcers, a physical manifestation of the stress of being the buffer between a tyrannical father and a crumbling world. He was the model son in a world of Model Ts, and the pressure of maintaining that perfection was lethal. The house is a masterpiece of light, but for Edsel, it was a place to hide. He would walk these gardens, looking out over the dark water of the lake, perhaps wondering what life would have been like if his last name were anything else. The labor that sustained this elegance remains hidden in the architecture. The servants at Gaukler Point moved through the same invisible passages as those at Fair Lane, but the atmosphere was subtly different. Eleanor treated the staff with a genuine kindness that reflected her own sense of entrapment. She knew what it felt like to be a bird in a beautiful cage. Yet, the fundamental equation remained unchanged. The comfort of the few was built on the discomfort of the many. While Edsel contemplated modern art, men like my grandfather were breathing in the soot of the furnaces, their lives measured by the second, their homes monitored by the sociological department. There is a profound loneliness in the grandeur of the stone chimneys and the vaulted ceilings. Gaukler Point represents the death of the individual in the face of the institution. Edsel was the most perfect product the Ford Empire ever produced. Refined, loyal, and utterly suppressed. He died in 1943, at the age of 49, worn out by a battle he was never allowed to win. His father survived him, a bitter king in a limestone castle, unable to understand why his son's spirit had broken. Standing on the terrace today, I see school groups and tourists marveling at the limestone walls. They see a dream of wealth. I see a monument to a silent struggle. Gaukler Point proves that even with $200 million and a lakefront view, you can still be a servant to a system. The empire did not just demand the sweat of the worker. It demanded the soul of the air. The stone is cold to the touch, and the lake wind is sharp. This house is a beautiful, tragic testament to the fact that when power becomes absolute, even the family becomes a resource to be managed, optimized, and eventually consumed. The Rivera painting in the dining room continues to stare at the empty chairs. The workers in the fresco are eternal, frozen in their labor, while the family that commissioned them has passed into history. The gilded cage remains, its doors now open to the public, but the echoes of Edsel's quiet, desperate grace still linger in the leaded glass, a reminder that the most expensive houses are often the hardest to call home. The humid air of the Michigan archive feels suddenly heavy, as if the moisture of the Amazon has seeped into the very paper of the maps spread before me. I am looking at blueprints for a place that defies every law of geography and common sense. Fordlandia. This was the empire's grandest hallucination, a 2.5 million acre stretch of Brazilian rainforest that Henry Ford attempted to reshape into a mirror image of Dearborn. It is a story of a mansion philosophy expanded to the scale of a city, a testament to the belief that American order could conquer any wilderness, no matter how ancient or untamed. In 1928, the Ford Motor Company was consuming rubber by the ton for tires, hoses, and gaskets. Ford loathed his dependence on British and Dutch plantations in Southeast Asia. His solution was characteristic. He would build his own supply chain. He secured a land grant larger than some American states and sent his managers into the heart of the Tapajós River region. They arrived not with respect for the jungle, but with the arrogant certainty of the assembly line. They cleared thousands of acres of primary forest, burning away the biodiversity of centuries to make room for the rigid geometry of the Midwest. I see the photographs of the town as it rose from the mud. It is a haunting sight. Rows of white clapboard houses with pitched roofs and screened porches stand in the middle of a tropical clearing. A massive water tower, stamped with the iconic Ford script, looms over the canopy like a steel god. There are fire hydrants, paved sidewalks, and a hospital that was, for a time, the most advanced in South America. But these structures were not built for the Amazon. They were built to satisfy the nostalgic ego of a man who refused to leave his office in Michigan. Henry Ford never visited Fordlandia. He directed the conquest of the jungle from the comfort of Fair Lane, treating the rainforest as just another unruly department that needed better management. The human cost of this dream was immediate. I think of the men like João, a composite of the thousands of Brazilian laborers who were lured by the promise of high wages. When they arrived, they found themselves trapped in a social experiment that ignored their humanity. Ford's managers imposed a strict Midwestern schedule. They blew the factory whistle at 5 o'clock in the morning, forcing men to work under the blistering equatorial sun when the heat was most lethal. Local rubber tappers knew that the trees should be tapped in the cool darkness before dawn, but the managers in Dearborn cared more about the clock than the climate. The control extended into the very stomachs of the workers. The company cafeterias served oatmeal, whole wheat bread, and canned peaches. The diet Ford believed created the most efficient human machines. They banned alcohol. They banned women. They attempted to replace the vibrant, rhythmic culture of the Amazon with square dances and poetry readings. I can almost feel the resentment simmering in that jungle heat. Imagine the absurdity. Men who had spent their lives navigating the complex ecosystem of the river being told to sing American folk songs and eat porridge while their bodies screamed for the nutrition of the land. The breaking point came in 1930. It was not a dispute over wages, but a revolt against the cafeteria. The workers, pushed to the edge by the soul-crushing uniformity of the food and the rigid shifts, finally snapped. They smashed the time clocks. They threw the industrial kitchen equipment into the river. They chased the American managers into the jungle, where the supervisors had to hide in the brush until the Brazilian military arrived to restore order. It was a riot against the very idea of being standardized. It was the moment the jungle said no. But the most devastating failure was biological. In their arrogance, Ford's experts ignored the warnings of local agriculturalists. They planted the rubber trees in dense, orderly rows, copying the layout of Southeast Asian plantations. But in the Amazon, the tree's native home, a fungal predator called South American leaf blight was waiting. In the wild, rubber trees are spaced far apart, preventing the blight from spreading. In Ford's efficient groves, the fungus leapt from leaf to leaf like wildfire. Thousands of acres of trees withered and died, turning the model plantation into a graveyard of blackened branches. The blight was the jungle's version of a labor strike, a biological refusal to comply with the assembly line. I look at a photo of the Fordlandia hospital, now a shell of rusted iron and encroaching vines. It represents the ultimate failure of the empire to understand that life cannot be reduced to a blueprint. Ford spent millions attempting to export the morality and the architecture of Fair Lane to the Tapajós, but the river and the forest proved more powerful than the billionaire. He tried to build a mansion in the jungle, not out of stone, but out of human behavior. He failed because he treated the world as raw material and people as interchangeable parts. The ruins of Fordlandia still stand today, a rusted skeleton of American hubris being slowly digested by the green maw of the forest. It remains a warning. You can build the houses, you can install the water towers, and you can blow the whistles, but you cannot own the soul of a place or the people within it. My grandfather was lucky. His cage was made of brick in Michigan. João's cage was made of wood in a jungle that eventually tore the bars apart. As I close the archive folder, the smell of damp earth seems to linger. The empire reached for the equator and found only the limits of its own power. For a long time, the weight of the archive felt like a physical burden on my shoulders. I carried the image of the sociological department's clipboard like a personal insult. I looked at the red bricks of Dearborn and saw only a massive, interlocking system of psychological coercion. I was angry. I was angry at the invisible bars of the $5 day, and I was angry at the way my grandfather's dignity had been traded for a porcelain sink and a steady paycheck. I saw Henry Ford as the ultimate architect of a velvet-lined prison, a man who built an empire of mansions while demanding that every worker's kitchen be a mirror of his own rigid morality. But as I spend more time walking these streets, the real streets, not the ones in the blueprints, the anger has begun to shift into a complex, quiet understanding. I realized that if I only saw the control, I was missing the humanity that thrived in spite of it. I was doing exactly what Ford's managers did. I was looking at the system and ignoring the people. The shift happened when I stopped looking at the model man and started looking at the neighbors. I began to find the stories that the sociological department never captured in their ledgers. I discovered the signal system that existed on Norwood Street. When a black company car was spotted turning the corner, the news traveled through the backyards like a lightning strike. People didn't just cower, they cooperated. They hid the prohibited bottles of cider. They helped a neighbor scrub a floor in 5 minutes. They whispered warnings through the thin walls of the duplexes. They practiced a form of communal resistance that was invisible to the men with the clipboards. My grandfather, James, was not a piston. He was a man who understood the terms of a brutal contract and decided to negotiate. He accepted the house, he accepted the rules, and he accepted the surveillance, but he never gave them his internal life. He played the part of the model worker for 8 hours a day at the Rouge, and for the 1 hour the inspector was in his living room. But the moment the door shut, the performance ended. He kept his traditions, his music, and his secret jokes. He lived a double life, carving out a sanctuary of personal identity within the belly of the corporate beast. I see now that the security Ford offered was a conditional gift, a precarious safety that could be revoked at any moment. But for a child of immigrants who had seen the raw, unshielded cruelty of industrial poverty, that gift was a weapon. My grandfather used that stability to build a platform for my father, and eventually, for me. He endured the appropriate frugality of the sociological department so that his grandchildren would never have to answer to a man with a clipboard. He traded his privacy for our possibility. There is a profound resilience in the way these families inhabited their cages. They took the standardized, 90-degree world of Henry Ford and slowly warped it with the heat of actual living. They didn't just live in the houses, they wore them down. They stained the floors with spilled wine during forbidden celebrations. They planted flowers that weren't on the approved botanical list. They turned a social experiment into a neighborhood. They proved that human nature is like the jungle in Fordlandia. You can clear the land and pave the roads, but the life underneath will always find a way to crack the concrete. The anger I felt toward the mansions, Fair Lane, Gaukler Point, the houses on the hill, was the anger of a grandson who wanted a cleaner history. I wanted my grandfather to have been a rebel, to have stood up to the inspectors and told them to leave his kitchen. But that is the luxury of my generation. James was a survivor. He knew that to build a future, you sometimes have to survive the present in a red brick box. He wasn't a victim of the empire. He was a silent partner who outlasted the firm. Understanding the empire doesn't mean forgiving the intrusion. It means recognizing the strength of those who lived within it. Henry Ford wanted to create a world of predictable machines. He failed, not because his rules weren't strict enough, but because the human spirit is inherently inefficient. We are messy, we are unpredictable, and we are stubbornly unique. The model streets of Dearborn are now filled with the beautiful chaos of individual lives, different paint colors, messy gardens, and the noise of 100 different cultures. I look at the house at number 405, and I don't see a cage anymore. I see a fortification. My grandfather took the bricks intended to contain him and used them to shield us. The empire is gone, but the resilience of the men who built it, not the billionaires, but the workers, is what truly remains. I feel a sense of liberation in this realization. I am no longer just the grandson of a monitored man. I am the voice of a man who won the long game. The empire had the folders, but my grandfather had the life. The official history of the Ford Empire is written in limestone, steel, and the cold ink of corporate ledgers. It is a story told by the victors, the architects, and the men who held the stopwatches. But there is another history, a subterranean narrative that lives in the memories of those who were meant to be silent. I have spent the last few years as a ghost hunter of sorts, seeking out the voices that were once muffled by the roar of the Rouge or the thick stone walls of the mansions. I am no longer looking for blueprints. I am looking for the truth that lives in the margins. I sit at a kitchen table on Norwood Street, across from Margaret. She has lived in this neighborhood for 43 years, moving into one of the original Ford houses shortly after the company began selling them to private owners. She is a bridge to a world that is fast disappearing. As she pours tea, I notice the way she looks at her own walls with a fierce, protective pride. To her, this house isn't a historical artifact. It is a hard-won victory. "You want to know about the model years?" she asks, her voice dry and crackling like old parchment. "My mother-in-law told me the real stories. They didn't just check the stove, Robert. They checked your eyes. They wanted to see if you were tired, because if you were tired, it meant you were doing something other than sleeping during your off hours. They wanted your whole life to be a straight line." She tells me about the Great Repainting. In the years immediately following Henry Ford's death in 1947, a strange and beautiful phenomenon occurred throughout Dearborn. It wasn't organized. There was no committee. But suddenly, one by one, the dark, drab doors of the workers' houses began to change. "It was like a fever," Margaret says, smiling. The moment the word got out that the sociological department was finally disbanded, people went to the hardware stores. They didn't want gray. They didn't want black. They wanted yellow, red, and that specific shade of robin's egg blue that my mother-in-law had dreamed about for 20 years. For the first time, you could tell which house was yours from a block away without looking at the number. This was the first act of the silent ones speaking, a chorus of colors. It was a visual scream of independence. Every brushstroke was a rejection of the community cohesion that the empire had used to justify its uniformity. I take my recorder to the descendants of the domestic staff at Fair Lane. I met a man named Arthur, whose grandmother was a laundress in the Great Stone House. He tells me stories of the Invisibles. The staff had their own language, a system of taps on the pipes and subtle nods that conveyed more information than a company telegram. They knew everything, Arthur says. They knew which guests hated the soybean meals. They knew when the master was in a foul mood before he ever opened his mouth. They lived in the walls, Robert, but they weren't ghosts. They were a community. When one maid fell ill, the others would do her work in secret so she wouldn't be dismissed. They maintained their own social safety net inside a system that viewed them as interchangeable parts. These stories are the counter-narrative to the Mansion Empire. They reveal that the control was never as total as Ford believed. While the billionaires were busy building their palaces and drawing their grids, the people were busy being human. They were forming alliances, sharing secrets, and maintaining their dignity in the small, quiet spaces between the rules. I found a woman whose grandfather was a gardener at Gaukler Point. She shows me a small, hand-carved wooden bird. "He made this in the shed," she says. Edsel saw him carving it once. Henry would have fired him for idleness or wasting company resources. But Edsel just looked at it, touched the wood, and told him it was beautiful. For a moment, they weren't master and servant. They were just two men who appreciated something that wasn't a machine. These fragments of memory are the real mortar of these buildings. The silent ones are finally speaking through the objects they left behind and the stories they passed down. They tell of secret parties held in the workers' basements where the music was loud and the beer was cold. The very things the sociological department tried to erase. They tell of the quiet solidarity between the invisibles in the mansion hallways and the cogs on the assembly line. The empire wanted to create a silent, efficient, and predictable workforce. Instead, it created a population of experts in the art of the hidden life. They learned how to give the company exactly what it demanded while keeping the best parts of themselves for each other. The history books talk about the $5 day, Margaret says, setting her teacup down with a firm click. But they don't talk about the price of the $5 day. We paid for it with our privacy. But we kept our stories, and in the end, the stories are what lasted. The company is just a name on a building now. We are the ones who are still here. As I leave Margaret's house, I look at the blue doors and the mismatched shutters of Norwood Street. They aren't just home improvements, they are testimonies. Each one is a voice. Each one is a refutation of the idea that people can be manufactured. The silent ones have been speaking for a long time. We just had to learn how to listen to the architecture of their resistance. The official archives of the Ford Motor Company are housed in climate-controlled rooms with white glove service and professional cataloging. But the archive I am building lives in the damp, crowded corner of my basement. It is a rogue collection, a disorganized rebellion of paper and metal that smells of old grease, attic dust, and unvarnished truth. I call it the People's Archive. It is a repository for everything the Empire deemed irrelevant or invisible. The fragments of life that fell through the cracks of the industrial machine. On a rickety wooden table, I have spread out the artifacts of a world that was never meant to be remembered this way. There are no gold-plated railroad spikes here, no silk-bound ledgers from the Vanderbilt era. Instead, I have a collection of employee badges, round, brass discs with numbers stamped into them. My grandfather's badge, number 1912, sits in the center. To the company, that number was his name. To me, the scratches on the metal are the record of every hour he leaned against a hot furnace, a tally of the physical toll extracted by the Empire. I have a box of pay stubs from 1934. If you look closely at the fine print, you can see the deductions: company store, medical fund, housing rent. The Empire did not just pay a wage, it recycled that wage back into itself. The money moved in a closed loop, ensuring that the worker remained a debtor to the system. But tucked between these stubs, I found a handwritten recipe for potato soup, written on the back of a disciplinary warning for unauthorized conversation on the line. It is a beautiful piece of evidence, proof that even in the middle of a 10-hour shift, a man was thinking about how to feed his children, defying the mandate of total mechanical focus. The most precious part of this archive is the forbidden photography. During the 1920s and 30s, cameras were strictly prohibited on the shop floor and discouraged in the company neighborhoods unless used by official public relations staff. Yet, I have dozens of blurry, poorly lit snapshots. They show men with soot-stained faces grinning during a lunch break, their arms draped around each other's shoulders. They show women in the Ford homes sitting on back porches, far from the prying eyes of the street-side inspectors, laughing over a bowl of illicitly brewed punch. These photos are acts of defiance. They captured the unstandardized moments. In the official company photos, everything is sterile and orderly. In my archive, the world is messy. I have a photograph of a backyard on Norwood Street where a family had planted a vegetable garden so dense and wild it would have made a sociological department inspector faint. They were growing tomatoes and peppers in the shadow of the world's largest factory. They were reclaiming the earth from the concrete. Look at this, I tell a young researcher who has come to visit my basement. I show her a small, rusted tin box. Inside are hundreds of tiny metal shavings. An old machinist kept these. Every day for 20 years, he took a pinch of the steel he was cutting and put it in his pocket. He said he was taking the factory back, 1 ounce at a time. He called it his pension. It's a box of stolen time. This archive is not about grand narratives. It is about the granular. It is about the invisibles from Fair Lane who saved the menus from the soybean dinners as souvenirs of the absurdity they had to witness. It is about the Brazilian workers in Fordlandia who kept the American-style forks and spoons after the company abandoned the jungle, using them as tools for their own gardens. I have a collection of letters from wives to the company headquarters, pleading for repairs on leaking roofs. Letters that were ignored by the billion-dollar corporation but preserved by the families as proof of their struggle. I am not just a collector. I am a witness. When I hold these objects, I feel the pulse of the thousands of lives that were folded into the Ford vision. The Empire wanted to simplify them, to reduce them to a set of predictable behaviors that could be graphed and optimized. But my basement proves they were infinite. They were poets, gardeners, drinkers, jokers, and rebels. They were people who lived in spite of the system, not because of it. I have started scanning these documents, creating a digital map of the Empire's human cost. I am linking the names in the sociological department's folders to the faces in my blurry snapshots. I am giving the data points their humanity back. When people ask me why I spend my weekends in a basement surrounded by rusted metal and yellowed paper, I tell them that Biltmore has its marble and the Rouge has its steel, but we have the memories. The People's Archive is growing every day. Descendants of workers from across the country send me their family secrets. An old badge, a grandmother's diary, a photograph of a blue door. We are building a monument that Henry Ford could never have imagined. It is a monument made of fragments, a history assembled from the bottom up. It is the story of the people who built the mansions but were never invited to stay, and the people who lived in the model homes but never felt like models. As I turn off the basement light, the smell of the old machinist's steel shavings lingers in the air. The empire is a ghost, but these objects are solid. They are the evidence that the billionaires may have owned the railroads and the factories, but they never owned the story. The archive is safe. The voices are no longer silent. Every pay stub and every blurred photograph is a brick in a house they can never take away. The iron gates of the Ford estates, once guarded by men in gray uniforms and the crushing weight of exclusivity, now stand wide open. I stand on the great lawn of Fair Lane, watching a scene that would have been an industrialist's nightmare. A group of local teenagers, wearing oversized headphones and carrying skateboards, lounge near the edge of the river. They are not here to study the prairie-style architecture or the genius of the hydroelectric plant. They are here because it is a sunny afternoon and the grass is soft. To them, this isn't a shrine of industry, it is a park. This is the liberation of space. The transition from private sanctuary to public inheritance is the final stage in the collapse of the mansion empire. When Eleanor Ford donated Gaukler Point to a public trust in 1976, she didn't just give away a house. She surrendered the power to decide who belonged on that shoreline. Today, the invisibles, the students from Detroit's inner city, the blue-collar families from the suburbs, the tourists from distant continents, walk through the front door without an invitation. They sit on the furniture. They breathe the air. They stare back at the Rivera paintings with an ownership that money cannot buy. I see this liberation most clearly in the model streets of Dearborn. In the 1920s, these blocks were a performance of corporate order. Today, they are a riot of human individuality. I walk down Norwood Street and count the infractions that would have triggered a sociological department investigation. One house has a bright orange door. Another has a porch filled with mismatched plastic chairs and a collection of garden gnomes that would have made Henry Ford wince. There is a vegetable garden where a perfect lawn should be, and a basketball hoop, slightly crooked and heavily used, bolted to the front of a garage. These small, messy details are the evidence of a successful rebellion. The uniformity has been broken by the chaotic, beautiful needs of actual families. The model houses have been lived in so hard that the edges have softened. The standardized kitchens are now filled with the smells of curry, tacos, and barbecue. The sense of 100 different cultures that were never supposed to inhabit these brick boxes. The surveillance has been replaced by the untidy warmth of a neighborhood. People talk across fences not to report a neighbor's drinking habits, but to share a beer or borrow a ladder. At Gaukler Point, the transformation is even more dramatic. The terrace where Edsel Ford once stood in quiet, ulcer-ridden isolation now hosts summer concerts. I have seen families spread out blankets on the grass where kings and presidents once walked. They eat sandwiches from plastic coolers, and their children spill juice on the stone steps. The aura of untouchable grandeur has evaporated, replaced by the hum of a community. The art on the walls is no longer a private rebellion. It is a public lesson. The gilded cage has been turned inside out. The liberation of these spaces is a form of justice. It is the reclamation of the land and the architecture by the descendants of the people who built it. When a visitor with calloused hands and a worn coat walks through the great hall of Fair Lane, they are reclaiming the labor of my grandfather and thousands of others. They are occupying the space that their ancestors' sweat paid for. The silence of the mansion has been replaced by the noise of the public, the questions of school children, the laughter of wedding parties, and the slow, heavy footsteps of retirees. I find a profound irony in the fact that the most controlled environments in American history are now among its most accessible historical sites. The billionaires built these places to escape the chaos of the people, yet it is the people who have preserved them. Without the public's tickets, their donations, and their interest, these mansions would have rotted away like the rubber trees in Fordlandia. The empire is a ghost, and we are the ones who decide which parts of it are worth haunting. I see a young woman sitting in the library at Gaukler Point, sketching the leaded glass windows in a notebook. She doesn't look intimidated by the limestone or the wealth. She looks like she is at home. That is the ultimate victory. The architecture of power has become the architecture of inspiration. The spaces that were designed to shape behavior have been reshaped by behavior itself. We have taken the piston and turned it into a bell. We have taken the factory and turned it into a garden. As the sun sets over the Rouge River, the light hits the windows of Fair Lane, and for a moment, the house looks less like a fortress and more like a lantern. The lights in the windows are no longer burning for a single family. They are burning for the community. The empire didn't win. The houses are still standing, but the walls have finally learned how to listen. The liberation is complete, not because the buildings were destroyed, but because the spirit of the people finally moved in and took up all the rooms. The evening sun hangs low over the Rouge River, casting a long, amber glow across the limestone facade of Fair Lane. I stand at the edge of the water, watching the light catch the restored glass of the west windows. For the first time in nearly a century, the house looks complete. The scaffolding is gone. The blue tarps that once clung to the cracked walls like bandages have been stripped away, revealing the stubborn strength of the stone underneath. But as I look up at the towering chimneys, I realize that the completion I see isn't a return to the past. It is a transformation into something entirely new. The Great Hall is no longer a silent vacuum of corporate command. Through the glass, I see the flickering of lights, not the cold, calculated illumination of a social experiment, but the warm, erratic glow of a house that has finally learned to breathe. A group of university students lingers in the library. Their laptops open on tables once reserved for the architects of global industry. They are not whispering in fear of an invisible master. They are debating, laughing, and challenging the very history that built the walls around them. The mansion empire has become a classroom, and its most important lesson is that no vision of order is ever final. I walk back toward the Ford homes, my footsteps steady on the sidewalk of Norwood Street. The porch lights are beginning to flicker on, one by one, down the long stretch of identical brick. But they aren't identical anymore. In one window, I see the blue light of a television. In another, the warm yellow of a kitchen where a family is eating a meal that certainly doesn't involve soybean porridge. There is a silhouette of a child playing in a living room where an inspector once measured the dust on the baseboards. The houses are glowing with the messy, unpredictable vitality of people who owe nothing to the sociological department. The empire of control has collapsed, but the community has survived. Henry Ford's greatest mistake was believing that he could manufacture a culture as easily as he could manufacture a car. He thought that by controlling the architecture, he could control the human heart. He failed because he underestimated the resilience of the men like my grandfather. James didn't just survive the 31 years of surveillance. He outlasted the ideology behind it. He kept his light burning in the window long after the company's fires went out. I think of the water tower in Fordlandia, standing dark and rusted against the Amazonian night. It no longer marks a territory of American hubris. It marks a town of 3,000 people who refused to vanish. I think of the terrace at Gaukler Point, where the lake wind no longer carries the weight of Edsel's silent grief, but the music of public concerts. The gilded cage is open. The mansion in the jungle is a home, and the model streets are finally, gloriously, unmodeled. I stop in front of house number 405. The door is no longer the drab, authorized gray of 1926. The current owners have painted it a bold, defiant shade of deep forest green. It is a small change, but to me, it is everything. It is the blue door my grandmother never got to have. It is the victory of the individual over the system. I reach out and touch the brick, the same brick my grandfather touched when he came home from the roar of the Rouge. It feels warm, as if it has finally absorbed enough human life to lose its industrial chill. The billionaires of the 19th century built palaces to hide their power. But the people of the 20th century turned those palaces into shared memories. We have taken the fragments of the empire, the brass badges, the censored photographs, the stone hallways, and we have woven them into a story that belongs to us. We are the inheritors of the mansions, not because we have the deeds, but because we have the truth. As the last bit of sun disappears below the horizon, I see my own reflection in the window glass, superimposed over the lights of the neighborhood. I am no longer just a guide through a dark story. I am a witness to a reclamation. The windows are bright, the doors are unlocked, and the air is free of the company's breath. The story of the mansion empire ends here, not with a collapse, but with a beginning. The lights are on, and for the first time in 100 years, they are burning for everyone.